Police cameras once recorded something impossible inside an abandoned church in the Czech Republic. For exactly 46 seconds, every security camera shut off, and when the footage returned, a night guard named Tomas was standing inside the church, surrounded by figures that weren't supposed to move. Because according to the town records, they were only sculptures. Deep inside the small village of Lukova stands St. George's Church. The building has been abandoned for decades. The roof has partially collapsed, the wooden pews are rotting, and no priest has held Mass there since the 1960s, but sometime in the early 2000s, dozens of strange white figures suddenly appeared inside the church. They sit quietly in the pews, covered head to toe in pale cloth, like faceless worshippers frozen mid-prayer. Tourists say there aren't installations. Locals say something very different. They say the church was never empty. It was simply waiting for its congregation to return. In 2012, the local council hired a night guard named Thomas Hruby. The church had started attracting vandals and thrill seekers. His job was simple: stay inside from 10 p.m. until sunrise, make sure no one enters. On his first night, Thomas counted the figures out of boredom, 32 of them. Everyone sitting quietly in the pews, white cloth, no faces. He laughed to himself. Creepy art project, he muttered. But sometime after midnight, the church became strangely cold. Not winter cold, the kind of cold that settles deep inside your ribs. At exactly 3 a.m., Thomas decided to count the figures again, but this time, there were only 31. Thomas walked slowly between the pews. Dust floated through the flashlight beam. 31. He counted again. 31. One of the figures was missing. He checked the side rooms, the broken confession booth, the collapsed storage area behind the altar. Nothing, no cloth, no footprints, no sign that anything had moved. When he returned to the main hall, all 32 figures were back in their seats, exactly as before, facing the altar. He told himself he must have miscounted, until he noticed something strange. One figure in the last row was no longer facing forward. It was turned slightly toward the aisle, toward him. At 3:17 a.m., Thomas's walkie-talkie suddenly crackled. That made no sense. There was no radio signal inside the church. Everyone in Lukova knew that, but a voice still came through, low, distorted, barely human. Mass is not over. Then silence. The temperature inside the church dropped instantly. Thomas could see his breath, and then he heard something, a soft sound. Fabric moving, like cloth slowly dragging across wood, one by one. The white figures began to turn, not quickly, not suddenly, just slightly. Just enough for Thomas to notice, their covered faces aligning toward him. Every pew, every row, slowly, silently, turning, until he felt 32 unseen faces staring at him. Thomas ran. He burst through the church doors and didn't stop running until he reached the street light outside. He stayed there until sunrise, trying to convince himself exhaustion had caused hallucinations. But the next morning, he decided to check the security footage. just to prove nothing had happened. At exactly 3:17 a.m., every security camera inside the church shut off. All screens went black for 46 seconds. When the footage returned, Tomas was standing inside the church in the center aisle, completely still, facing the seated figures. But Tomas had no memory of going back inside. He zoomed into the footage. What he saw made his stomach drop. His body stood frozen in the aisle. But the figures in the pews were not sitting anymore. They were standing, all 32 of them, surrounding him, very close, too close. Their cloth coverings moved slightly, as if something underneath was breathing. For a moment, Tomas thought the footage was fake, a glitch, a camera error, until something else appeared on the screen. One of the figures slowly reached out and placed its hand on his shoulder. Tomas stared at the monitor, but he felt nothing. No memory, no sensation, just empty time. Then the cameras cut again when the footage returned. All the figures were back in their seats, facing forward, exactly like statues. And Thomas was outside the church, banging on the locked doors, trying desperately to get out. He quit his job the next morning, packed his things, and left Lucifer the same day. Before leaving town, he told one villager only 2 sentences. They're not sculptures. They're the congregation. Months later, tourists visited the church. They took photographs of the strange white figures. One photo showed something unsettling. Taken from the altar, facing the pews, all the figures were sitting peacefully, except one. Standing in the center aisle, closer to the camera, head slightly tilted and the cloth covering its face was gone. Underneath was nothing, just a dark hollow where a face should be. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the empty face. It was the floor. On the wooden boards beneath the figure were fresh, muddy footprints leading from the church entrance, as if someone had recently walked inside and stopped in the aisle, exactly where the figure was standing. Locals in Lukova say something strange about St. George's Church. They say Mass still happens there every night, but the service never ends because the congregation is always waiting for one more person to arrive. And if you ever visit the church after sunset and notice an empty seat beside you,
this place holds secrets.
Don't sit down.
Be wary.
Because the moment the last seat is filled, Mass will finally end. And something inside that church will finally be allowed to leave.